your responses will just come natural. You'll realize quickly when you're being manipulated and know exactly how to respond. You'll no longer be in freeze response or fight or flight. Instead, you'll take appropriate action and you'll suddenly have no inkling left to be someone's slave. So how many of you have a shame wound? I remember years ago telling a friend of mine that I was so sick and tired of feeling ashamed and not knowing what it was that I was supposed to be ashamed about. I felt shame for feeling vulnerable. I felt shame for having needs. I felt shame around my siblings in particularly. When we grow up being constantly judged and shown that we just weren't up to par with everyone else, especially when we've made mistakes, and who doesn't, we end up feeling that we're these disgusting things that should go hide in a corner. So like I just mentioned, top that off with the mistakes that you've ever made, and that shame is multiplied by 1,001. And often one of the reasons for that is in this growing up experience, we become the scapegoat, which continues on well into adulthood, where siblings or parents continue to be in judgment of anything that you do. So heaven forbid they know about any of the mistakes that you've ever made. And so we spend a lifetime torturing ourselves, never ever being able to forgive ourselves because we were branded as bad. Deep down, we believe that, thanks to the continued scapegoating. We believe that we're no good, we're trash. And this bad, it comes from guilt, which is another emotion in and of itself, but it's confused with shame. Shame is from feeling and believing that we're just unacceptable with nothing lovable about us. Guilt is the feeling that we feel when we do wrong things like mistakes. But when the two emotions are interwoven together like that, it becomes a feeling of hopelessness. If we could separate the two, we would have something to work with. For example, you could take a look at the idea of guilt and really ask yourself, what really have you done wrong? Or so wrong that it would mean you deserve hatred and that you don't deserve forgiveness. And then ask yourself, how is it that I'm bad? Am I really bad? Because if you were really a bad person, you wouldn't feel guilt right now. Then if we decipher the word, or rather the emotion of shame, what questions could we ask ourselves? What is it about me that constitutes dehumanization and disapproval? Is that really true that I should hide under beds so that no one sees me? What is worthy of me? Write those things down. What is it about me that makes me a good thing to the world? Have I not got intelligence? Do I not have kindness in my heart? Am I without talent? So you see, by giving yourself the space, as I so often repeat, we get to take the moment to be here now and take a real look at what is truth and what is untrue. As victims of narcissistic abuse, we are so busy in survival mode, whether that's doing extra for them so that they're happy when they get home, so that they don't bring you down, or so that they acknowledge you, because you're never seen. And being seen is something that we need for survival as humans. We are so busy in this constant survival mode that we easily forget that the key lies in paying attention here, right here. When we can process how we feel, the healing can begin. It is so important to do all of this processing in order to identify what we feel, because when we can identify it, we can calm its energy. Dan Siegel has a book out named Name It to Tame It, which some of you might be interested in picking up. And no, I'm not promoting here. I just like to give credit where credit is due. It's important because the emotion of shame, when left undealt with, carries into it more dark and heavy emotions like hatred, anger, resentment, and depression. And the thing is that when you're carrying around a slew of heavy emotions like that, your brain, it floods your body with all kinds of harmful chemicals, which in turn can cause issues such as digestive issues, hair loss, weight gain or weight loss, and anxiety attacks. Or how about thyroid disease? Can anyone relate here? Leave a comment down below if so. Let's talk about this. And that's heavy to carry every day. How long has it been since you've jumped out of bed in the morning just because the sun was shining? Life is short and we can never get back what has already come, but we can get a whole different experience in our future if we decide to just look, to really look. And how? Where do you start other than looking to how we feel? I'm about to give you that. But first, I want to instill deeply in you the idea of processing your emotions and asking the self the questions that I just mentioned. It is the step that you absolutely need to take before anything else. So look at your emotions, and not just the guilt and shame emotions, but all of them, because they're all entangled into each other. Learn emotional intelligence, also referred to as EQ or emotional literacy. And what that means is being able to read your emotions. Right now, you are illiterate. You can't read your emotions. You don't understand them, which is why they call it emotional intelligence, which is why also that you end up freezing in freeze response. So let's say something happens in your day with someone. For example, the narcissist says something to you in a way that's confusing to you. They said something backhanded and manipulative that you had no idea how to respond. You couldn't respond because you didn't know how you felt. So you went into that freeze response that I just mentioned. You knew you felt upset, but you weren't sure if you were supposed to, because your brain is also thinking perhaps they didn't mean anything by it because they didn't yell at you or anything like that. And that's cognitive dissonance. But yet all of this, it doesn't sit right with you, because the file that's classified at its most important at the top of the pile is the file that says be nice, because you were taught that you had to be nice and never say no. Otherwise, you were bad. You were taught to be a slave. Now, what happens when we process our emotions is that we are able to place each file in their proper place. Let's say someone asks you to babysit for the 100th time and you aren't comfortable with it at all, and you still say yes. You say yes because as resentful and angry that you felt, the dominant emotion was that you are bad if you say no. And the reason it is still your dominant emotion is because that's the one that you've been looking at. That's the one you've been paying attention to subconsciously. You're not looking at other emotions, but when you shine a light on them, they end up at the top of the pile. So the reason for the confusion is because the thoughts and emotions were not filed in any of their proper places for you to pull out the right information as events took place. Once you start looking at them, changes begin within you immediately. So here's what you do. I want you to go to your computer and I want you to Google search list of emotions. Pick the one that vibes best with you, but do pick one that has a long list. The other piece of advice would be to try and pick one that's organized. For example, sad emotions in one list, happy all listed under happy, etc. Now, when anything happens to you during the day, anything that triggers something in you, and if you live with a narcissist, you won't have trouble finding any. But when I say anything, I mean anything and everything, even something as small as a friend not returning a text that made you feel a little bit off or uneasy. So I want you to pull out your list and go down each word in each category that you can relate to. And it only takes 1 to 2 seconds looking at each word. But when I say 1 or 2 seconds, maybe I'm not wording that right. Take 3 seconds. You want to look at each word and you want to stop to not just look, but to acknowledge the feeling. Feel it inside of you, only for a couple of seconds. Become aware of it. This is magical here. So you look at your list, for example. Angry. Yes, I'm angry. Frustrated. Yes, I do feel frustrated. Disgusted. Yes, I can relate to that. And that's all you need to do. Just go down the list until you can find all of them. It sounds like nothing, but what you're doing right there is processing. And when you're processing, your brain is filing things in their proper places. And it'll be different every time. Sometimes it'll be just the simple acknowledgement, which is beautiful. Sometimes it can lead to a deep, compassionate, sorrowful cry for you, a cleansing. Other times a memory will come up or aha moments and things like that. But always an empowerment starts to take place within you where it becomes second nature to say no to someone, for example, without feeling guilt of any kind, and your head is held up high. There's this deep respect that takes place, a respect for self that you never even knew you had. So your responses will just come natural. You'll realize quickly when you're being manipulated and know exactly how to respond. You'll no longer be in freeze response or fight or flight. Instead, you'll take appropriate action and you'll suddenly have no inkling left to be someone's slave. Now, while you're going through all of this new learning, I want you to do something else, something that I've called tea with self. Now, tea with self is something that I talk about in the last module of my course, but I feel I didn't talk about it enough. But I should have, because tea with self is what drove it all home for me in my healing after I did all the other stuff. It was the last piece that I needed to do to complete the journey. It was in that moment that all the guilt and shame left me, never to return. But don't jump to that one ahead here. You really want to become emotionally literate. So don't skip that part. For me, it started after the narcissist in my life was gone. He had been in my life for 10 years, and throughout those years, I studied immediately within the first year when I realized what I had attracted. And I knew that I had attracted this for a big lesson, and until I learned the lesson, I would be stuck. So for 10 years, I studied narcissism. I took courses, and for 10 years, I researched ways to heal my own stuff. And it was layers upon layers, and it was often hit and miss, but I kept digging. My saying is you can always go deeper. Anyway, all the modalities in my course were what I did that got me to break away, but once he was gone, I still had a huge mess to clear. Like I say, there's always a mess to clean up after the party. So I was healed to the point where I knew that I deserved way better than that. And he needed to go. I had learned a deep respect for myself, and I knew at 100% that I was doing the right thing. No regrets, no cognitive dissonance. But the voices saying things like, you'll never make it on your own, were still screaming loud in my ears because I was getting older here, right? So I was left with me solely to deal with no one around occupying my mind with survival tactics. I had space, but I also had fears, and I didn't know what to do with these fears welling up in me. So I followed my intuition, hoping for the best, and the best definitely happened. I thought of the mirror work that I learned years ago from Louise Hay with affirmations like, I am enough, or I love you very much, Deanna, but none of that ever resonated with me. I could never really look in the mirror and say, I love you, and mean it or feel it. The shame wound was, it was too forefront. So following my intuition, one day I made a cup of tea and I sat on my bathroom floor in front of a full-length mirror. You see, this time I wasn't looking into my eyes here like Louise Hay was telling you to do, right? I was looking at a whole other person on the other side, which made it way easier to talk. So I made a decision that I was going to give her my time every day and have tea with her. I was going to give her the time of day. I was going to show her that she was worth my time. Thoughts to change beliefs are great, but action can really move you forward. And if no one ever made me foremost, I needed to take the first step in making that happen. So, tea with self. Some days I would sit without knowing what to talk about. Other days I was too angry to talk to her, but I did it anyway. I never knew what the conversations were going to be, but I would always start with things like, what's up? Or what do you want to talk about? And sometimes I'd say, I couldn't even look at myself in the mirror. I'd just say, what do you want? And I wouldn't even look in the mirror. But something would always happen. Magic would happen. And some of the biggest outcomes were on the days where I really didn't want to because of my high emotions. But every single time, a clearing happened. Sometimes they were deep conversations. Other times it was a cleansing of tears released from so deep that I would vomit. And I remember the very day that all shame and guilt left for good. I remember that moment. I think I'll always remember this. I was in the middle of a conversation with self, and all of a sudden something just lifted. I felt it. It just lifted. I literally felt it. And what had happened was that while talking to self, I somehow had become the counselor, and the person in the mirror was the patient, if you will. What I realized later was what had happened is I had acknowledged myself that day. I listened to what that person in the mirror was saying. I was giving her space to be. I was giving her permission to be, to move forward. I had acknowledged the person that is me. The very issue that caused all these years of pain of not being acknowledged, which is your issue. So I'm leaving it all up to you to decide whether you want to do this or not. Like my mother used to always say, you are a free agent of the universe. But for those of you who do want to do this, just remember what I just talked about before tea with self first, emotional intelligence. So pull out your lists and start the healing process. Give yourself the space. Acknowledge your feelings and acknowledge the self that is you. You can come out of hiding now. And so for those of you, if any, who can relate to anything that I say or who can benefit from my work, please click on the bell, comment, and subscribe. And thank you for your time. I am wishing you all an amazing week, and we shall see you in the next video. Bye for now.